Hello, friends, and welcome to Jewels of Truth. My name is Daniel Fontenot, and yes, we will continue reading from this book, Our Authorized Bible Vindicated. It has much valuable information concerning our Authorized Bible. Our Authorized Bible is the King James Version. It has been referred to as such for many years. And it's written by B.G. Wilkinson, who was the Dean of Theology for Washington Missionary College, now known as Columbia Union College today. During his long years of service to the cause he loved, he also dedicated his life to ministry and study. This work is the culmination of study for many urgent requests he received on this pertinent subject. So, we are continuing to in case you are joining us for the first time, maybe you are a new subscriber, I have been saying and will continue to say that there are two streams of Bibles. One that is pure, it is a pure line, it comes from the apostles of Christ, and the other is the impure line, which comes from paganism, because it is called the Eusebio Origen version, published by Constantine, and it had much pagan philosophy, pagan doctrines in it, and this is the Bible that the Catholic Church derives its doctrines from. So, the name of this presentation is, Did the Waldenses Use a Catholic Bible? If you haven't researched who the Waldenses were, you should do so. They have their origin from, I think, 120 A.D., just about 20 years after John the Apostle died. No matter what the so-called authorities will tell you, because I know I'm very much aware that some will tell you that they didn't even emerge or come into existence until the 1200s, and that is just false. Back then, in their early stages, their early existence, they were not known as Waldenses, but later they began to be known as Waldenses. So let's continue. Did the Waldenses use a Catholic Bible? In southern France, when in 177 A.D. the Gallic Christians were frightfully massacred by the heathen, a record of their suffering was drawn up by the survivors and sent not to the Pope of Rome, but to their brethren in Asia Minor. Milman claims that the French received their Christianity from Asia Minor. These apostolic Christians in southern France were undoubtedly those who gave effective help in carrying the gospel to Great Britain. And as we have seen above, there was a long and bitter struggle between the Bible of the British Christians and the Bible which was brought later to England by the missionaries of Rome. And as there were really only two Bibles, the official version of Rome and the received text, and the received text is another name for the King James Bible. The King James Bible came from what was called the received text, or as another word, it is called the Textus Receptus. Received text is the English form of Textus Receptus. Textus Receptus being the Latin phrase. Continuing, and as there were really only two Bibles, the official version of Rome and the received text, we may safely conclude that the Gaelic or French Bible, as well as the Celtic or British, were the received text. Neander claims as follows that the first Christianity in England came not from Rome, but from Asia Minor, probably through France. Quote, but the peculiarity of the later British Church is evidently against its origin from Rome, for in many ritual matters it departed from the usage of the Romish Church and agreed much more nearly with the churches of Asia Minor. It withstood for a long time the authority of the Romish papacy. This circumstance would seem to indicate that the Britons had received their Christianity either immediately or through Gaul from Asia Minor, a thing quite possible and easy by means of the commercial intercourse. The later Anglo-Saxons, who opposed the spirit of ecclesiastical independence among the Britons and endeavored to establish the church supremacy of Rome, were uniformly inclined to trace back the church establishments to a Roman origin, from which effort many false legends as well as this might have arisen. That the messengers of God who carried manuscripts from the churches of Judea to the churches of northern Italy and on brought to the forerunners of the Waldenses a Bible different from the Bible of Roman Catholicism. I quote the following. The method which Alex has pursued in his History of the Churches of Piedmont is to show that in the ecclesiastical history of every century, from the 4th century, which he considers a period early enough for the inquirer after apostolical purity of doctrine, there are clear proofs that doctrines, unlike those which the Romish Church holds, and conformable to the belief of the Waldensian and Reformed churches, were maintained by theologians of the north of Italy down to the period when the Waldenses first came into notice. Consequently, the opinions of the Waldenses were not new to Europe in the 11th and 12th centuries, and there is nothing improbable in the tradition that the subalpine church persevered in its integrity in an uninterrupted course from the first preaching of the gospel in the valleys. Unquote. There are many earlier historians who agree with this view. It is held that the pre-Waldensian Christians of northern Italy could not have, notice this now, could not have had doctrines purer than Rome unless their Bible was purer than Rome's. That is, it was not of Rome's falsified manuscripts. That in itself should tell us a lot. Again, the pre-Waldensian Christians of northern Italy could not have had doctrines purer than Rome unless their Bible was purer than Rome's. It was not of Rome's falsified manuscripts. It is inspiring to bring to life again the outstanding history of an authority on this point. I mean Ledger. This noble scholar of Waldensian blood was the apostle of his people in the terrible massacres of 1655 and labored intelligently to preserve their ancient records. His book, The General History of Evangelical Churches of the Piedmontese Valleys, published in French in 1669 and called Scarce in 1825, is the prized object of scholarly searchers. It is my good fortune to have that very book before me, the author says. Ledger, when he calls Olivetan's French Bible of 1537 entire and pure, says, quote, I say pure because of the ancient exemplars which formerly were found among the papists were full of falsifications, which caused Beza to say in his book on illustrious men in the chapter on the Vaudois, Vaudois is the French name for Waldenses, that one must confess it was by means of the Vaudois of the valleys that France today has the Bible in her own language. Yes, he attributes the French having the Bible in their own language to the Vaudois, or the Waldenses of the valleys. This godly man, Olivetan, in the preface of his Bible, recognizes with thanks to God that since the time of the apostles or their immediate successors, the torch of the gospel had been lit among the Vaudois, or the dwellers in the valleys of the Alps, two terms which mean the same, and has never since been extinguished. The Waldenses of northern Italy were foremost among the primitive Christians of Europe in their resistance to the papacy. Yes, the Waldenses were foremost among the primitive Christians of Europe in their resistance to the papacy. And the papacy has tried to bury their history. In some cases, they have tried to deny that they ever existed. They not only sustained the weight of Rome's oppression, but they were successful in retaining the torch of truth until the Reformation took it from their hands and held it aloft to the world. Veritably, they fulfilled the prophecy of Revelation concerning the church, which fled into the wilderness, where she hath a place prepared of God. Revelation 12:6 and 14. They rejected the mysterious doctrines, the hierarchical priesthood, and the worldly titles of Rome, while they clung to the simplicity of the Bible. And this is why they were hated by Rome. The agents of the papacy had done their utmost to calumniate their character, to destroy the records of their noble past, and to leave no trace of the cruel persecution they underwent. Yes, Rome has even tried to bury the record of their persecution, the persecution that they heaped upon the Waldenses. They went even farther. Notice this. They went even farther. They made use of words written against ancient heresies to strike out the name of the heretics and fill the blank space by inserting the name of the Waldenses, just as if in a book written to record the lawless deeds of some bandit like Jesse James, his name should be stricken out and the name of Abraham Lincoln substituted. How would you like that? How would you like if someone did that to you personally? You didn't commit a crime, but they put your name in place of the other one who did commit the crime, as if you committed the crime. The Jesuit Gretzer, in a book written against the heretics of the 12th and 13th centuries, put the name of Waldenses at the point where he struck out the name of these heretics. Nevertheless, we greet with joy the history of their great scholars who were ever a match for Rome. In the 4th century, Helvidius, a great scholar of northern Italy, accused Jerome, whom the Pope had empowered to form a Bible in Latin for Catholicism, with using corrupt Greek manuscripts. How could Helvidius have accused Jerome of employing corrupt Greek manuscripts if Helvidius had not had the pure Greek manuscripts? And so learned and so powerful in writing and teaching was Jovinian, the pupil of Helvidius, that it demanded 3 of Rome's most famous fathers, Augustine, Jerome, and Ambrose, to unite in opposing Jovinian's influence. Even then, it needed the condemnation of the Pope and the banishment of the Emperor to prevail. Wow. But Jovinian's followers lived on and made the way easier for Luther. Jovinian, one of his main things is that he attacked the asceticism, if that's the correct word to use, of Rome. In other words, these monks, you know how the monks lived, monasticism, okay? You don't marry, and you live in this hovel, and you pretend to be denying yourself and just, really abusing your health, and trying to by these means to gain heaven and pretend to be righteous by these things, Jovinian condemned this, and he was hated for it. History does not afford a record of cruelty greater than that manifested by Rome toward the Waldenses. It is impossible to write fully the inspiring history of this persecuted people whose origin goes back to apostolic days and whose history is ornamented with stories of gripping interest. I would highly encourage you to look up the Waldenses, read J.A. Wiley's history of the Waldenses. Very, very gripping stories. Rome had obliterated the records. Rome has obliterated the records. Dr. De Sanctis, many years a Catholic official at Rome, sometime official censor of the Inquisition and later a convert to Protestantism, thus reports the conversation of a Waldensian scholar as he points out to others the ruins of Palatine Hill, Rome. Quote, "See," said the Waldensian, "a beautiful monument of ecclesiastical antiquity. These rough materials are the ruins of the two great Palatine libraries, one Greek and the other Latin, where the precious manuscripts of our ancestors were collected, and with Pope Gregory I, called the Great, caused to be burned." Unquote. The destruction of the Waldensian records, beginning about 600 A.D. by Gregory I, was carried through with thoroughness by the secret agents of the papacy. Quote, It is a singular thing," says Gilly, "that the destruction or rapine which has been so fatal to Waldensian documents should have pursued them even to the place of security, to which all that remained were consigned to Moreland in 1658, the library of the University of Cambridge. The most ancient of these relics were ticketed in 7 packets distinguished by letters of the alphabet from A to G. The whole of these were missing when I made inquiry for them in 1823." Unquote. There are modern writers who attempt to fix the beginning of the Waldenses from Peter Waldo, who began his work about 1175. This is a mistake. I remember recently on one of the more recent videos, a person, I informed a certain person about the Waldenses because he was asking, who were the first peoples who preserved a pure Bible apart from the Catholic Bible. And I mentioned to him the Waldenses, and so he evidently went and researched it, and so the information that he got was that the Waldenses began in the 1200s, and this is just simply not true. This is a mistake. The historical name of this people as properly derived from the valleys where they lived is Vaudois, Baudaois. It is a French name, Vaudois. Their enemies, however, ever sought to date their origin from Waldo. Waldo was an agent evidently raised up of God to combat the errors of Rome. Gilly, who made extensive research concerning the Waldenses, pictures Waldo in his study at Lyon, France, or Lyon, France, maybe that's pronounced that way, with associates, a committee like the translators of our own authorized version. Nevertheless, the history of the Waldenses, or Vaudois, begins centuries before the days of Waldo. So don't be fooled by this claim that they began with this guy named Waldo. Waldo was a Christian, and he was an agent of God, I believe, but he was not the beginning of the Waldenses. This is a mere assumption. There remains to us in the ancient Waldensian language the noble lesson, La Noble Leçon, written about the year 1100 A.D., which assigns the first opposition of the Waldenses to the Church of Rome to the days of Constantine the Great, when Sylvester was pope. This may be gathered from the following extract. All, quote, all the popes which have been from Sylvester to the present time, okay, and unquote. Thus, when Christianity emerging from the long persecutions of pagan Rome was raised to imperial favor by the Emperor Constantine, the Italic Church in northern Italy, later the Waldenses, is seen standing in opposition to papal Rome. And that would be just natural, because when Constantine took over, okay, and then as we have presented in past videos, past presentations, after Constantine became the emperor, gradually the bishops came into power, and then you have the Catholic Church coming into power. So it would be completely natural for a people in that area to say, hey, we're out of here. We don't agree with this apostasy. So they went north, if they didn't already live north there in Italy. Their Bible was of the family of the renowned italic. It was that translation into Latin which represents the received text. Its very name, Itala, is derived from the Italic district, the regions of the Vaudois. Of the purity and reliability of this version, Augustine, speaking of different Latin Bibles about 400 AD, says, now among translations themselves, the Italian, or Itala, is to be preferred to the others, for it keeps closer to the words without prejudice to clearness of expression, unquote. The old Waldensian liturgy, which they used in their services down through the centuries, contained texts of Scripture of the ancient version called the italic. The Reformers held that the Waldensian Church was formed about 120 A.D. The Reformers, meaning people like Martin Luther and others, they said that the Waldensian Church was formed about 120 A.D., from which date on they passed down from father to son the teachings they received from the apostles. The Latin Bible, the italic, was translated from the Greek not later than 157 A.D. We are indebted to Beza, the renowned associate of Calvin, for the statement that the italic church dates from 120 A.D. From the illustrious group of scholars which gathered around Beza in 1590 A.D., we may understand how the received text was the bond of union between great historic churches. The received text, let me repeat, the received text was the bond of union between great historic churches, meaning like the Waldensian Church and the Reformed churches or Protestants. As the 16th century is closing, we see in the beautiful Swiss valley of Geneva, Beza, as B-E-Z-A, an outstanding champion of Protestantism, the scholar Cyril Lucor, later to become the head of the Greek Catholic Church, and Diodati, also a foremost scholar, as Beza astonishes and confounds the world by restoring manuscripts of that Greek New Testament from which the King James is translated. Diodati takes the same and translates into Italian a new and famous edition adopted and circulated by the Waldenses. Leger, the Waldensian historian of his people, studied under Diodati at Geneva. He returned as pastor to the Waldenses and led them in their flight from the terrible massacre of 1655, and it was terrible. He prized as his choicest treasure the Diodati Bible, the only worldly possession he was able to preserve. Cyril Lucor hastened to Alexandria, where Codex A, the Alexandrian manuscript, is lying, and laid down his life to introduce the Reformation and the Reformers the pure light regarding the books of the Bible. At the same time, another group of scholars, bitterly hostile to the first group, were gathered at Reims, France. There, the Jesuits, assisted by Rome and backed by all the power of Spain, brought forth an English translation of the Vulgate. In its preface, they expressly declared that the Vulgate had been translated in 1300 into Italian and in 1400 into French, the sooner to shake out the deceived people's hands the false heretical translations of a sect called Waldenses. So they tried to, again, foist upon them a false version of the Bible. This proves that Waldensian versions existed in 1300 and 1400. It was the Vulgate, Rome's corrupt scriptures against the received text, the New Testament of the Apostles, of the Waldenses, and of the Reformers. That Rome in early days corrupted the manuscripts while the Italic Church handed them down in their apostolic purity, Alex, the renowned scholar, testifies. He reports the following as Italic articles of faith. Quote, "They receive only, saith he, what is written in the Old and New Testament. They say that the popes of Rome and other priests have depraved the Scriptures by their doctrines and glosses." This is an historic statement. Yet some people of which have commented on these videos, they oppose what I am presenting here, and they pretend, some of them maybe ignorantly, but I know Rome does this purposely, they pretend that their version, their Catholic version, is the only version that ever existed. Not so, because you have the record of these early Christians saying they receive only what is written in the Old and New Testament. They say that the popes of Rome and other priests have depraved the Scriptures by their doctrines and glosses. Glosses meaning their explanations of Scripture. It is recognized that the Itala was translated from the received text, Syrian, Hurt calls it, that the Vulgate is the Itala with the readings of the received text removed. Okay. So we come to the end of this segment of this book. I know I have done a lot of reading here. I hope that you have been able to follow me in this video and understand what I have said. If you have any questions, place your comments or questions at the bottom of this video. If you appreciate this and agree with this presentation, then press that like button at the bottom of this video. And if you haven't subscribed, we would highly encourage you to do so. We thank you for joining us here at Jewels of Truth. We pray that you will have a good day in the Lord.